March 9th, 1945, over the Philippine Sea, south of Iwo Jima. The engines scream, all four of them. Their deep, droning thunder vibrates through the aluminum skin of the aircraft, like a war drum echoing across the Pacific night. The men of B-29, Dynamite, sit silent, faces lit by the ghostly red of instrument lights, sweat beads on brows, despite the altitude. They're flying at just 7,000 feet, not 30,000 like usual, and the mission is unlike any they've flown before. Captain Raymond Smoot, 27, adjusts his headset, leans forward over the yoke, and steals a glance at the black water far below. He's a farm kid from Missouri, now steering one of 334 bombers toward the most heavily populated city in the world, Tokyo. In the pressurized rear compartment, Sergeant James Elkins loads M-69 incendiaries by the dozens, their cylindrical bodies glinting like miniature kegs of vengeance. He murmurs to himself, steadying his nerves. There are no parachutes this time. Orders were clear. Full fuel, full bomb load, no wait for jump gear. Behind him, a whisper. "Tokyo's gonna glow like a Christmas tree," mutters Lieutenant Robert Kimball, the bombardier. His grin doesn't reach his eyes. The sky is clear. The moon is nearly full. And somewhere over Honshu, a city of nearly 7 million, sleeps unaware that within a few hours, it will become a crucible of fire. 6 months earlier, Tokyo, Japan. In a smoky room beneath the Imperial Army's General Staff Office, military planners laugh. Superfortress? General Kawabe chuckles, flipping through the intercepted Allied pamphlet. A fortress that flies 30,000 feet in the air, across oceans, and carries 10 tons of bombs? American fantasies. No plane that large can even land without breaking its wheels. Other officers smirk, dismissing grainy recon photos as propaganda. Their anti-aircraft batteries are limited. Japan's defensive strategy has always assumed geography as its greatest weapon. The Pacific was vast. The coastline was their moat. No American plane had ever dared to strike from so far away, not since Doolittle's brief, daring jab in 1942. Besides, even the new Zero replacements could not reliably reach those altitudes. But they hadn't yet met the B-29. Back over the Pacific, 0200 hours. Major General Curtis LeMay's orders are precise and unorthodox. Drop altitude, strip guns, ditch formation bombing for area fire, and instead of explosives, fire napalm. Sticky, gasoline-jellied death packed into bomblets. It was LeMay's grim innovation. High-altitude daylight raids hadn't broken Japan's industrial grip. Flak bursts, jet streams, and poor accuracy had plagued results. But fire didn't need precision. And Tokyo was built from wood and paper. The American bombers begin to approach the coastline. Radar picks up faint returns over Choshi. Air raid sirens in Tokyo wail, but too late. The planes are low, fast, and many. The defenders aren't ready. Searchlights snap on, flak gunners scramble, but the sky is already full of thunder. Below, in Tokyo's eastern wards, Shidamachi civilians hear the first cluster bombs drop like wind chimes. A second later, the air catches fire. Sergeant Elkins peers out the window. He sees the first waves of M-69 seconds blossom like orange flowers across neighborhoods of tatami and timber. It's not a single explosion. It's thousands of small fires, igniting rooftops and alleys, sweeping into a tidal wave of flame. Children scream. Mothers drag bundles toward canals. Fire brigades try to form lines, but the wind, stoked by the heat, becomes a hurricane. Oxygen is sucked from shelters. Wooden buildings explode from within. The temperature rises past 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. Captain Smoot doesn't look back. He flies steady over the inferno, holding formation, ignoring the tracers that rise from the dark below. "We're not bombing a factory," Elkins whispers. "We're burning a city." But that was the plan. By dawn, the firestorm has consumed 16 square miles of Tokyo. More than 100,000 civilians are dead, some melted into the streets, others suffocated in underground shelters that became ovens. Hospitals overflow, firefighters collapse. The smoke is visible from 150 miles away. Back at base on Guam, the crews of the 73rd Bomb Wing land one by one. Ground crews gasp at the smell of scorched residue clinging to bomb bays. One mechanic vomits. A young radio operator, Private Reggie Thomason, writes in his journal, "They said it was victory. But it didn't feel like it. In Tokyo, the laughter has stopped." General Anami studies reconnaissance photos the next day. He says nothing. 1/3 of Tokyo is gone. Officers sit stunned in silence. One murmurs, "We underestimated them." Another replies bitterly, "We underestimated the fire." The age of industrial bombing has arrived. The B-29, once mocked for its bulk, its complexity, its cost, has become the embodiment of distant, godlike destruction. And more are coming. August 6th, 1943, Wichita, Kansas. The air smells of oil and hot metal inside Boeing Plant No. 2. Under a forest of steel rafters, the Superfortress begins to take form. Rows of workers, men in denim coveralls, women with tied-back hair and riveting guns swarm over its massive fuselage. It dwarfs every other aircraft on the assembly floor. 6 stories tall from belly to fin. A wingspan wider than 2 tennis courts end to end. The B-29 Superfortress isn't just a bomber. It's a flying contradiction, huge, yet built for speed. Heavy, yet pressurized for high-altitude flight. And in its belly, it carries the capacity to erase entire city blocks. In Bay 5C, a young engineer named Charles "Red" Nichols adjusts a coolant line inside one of the 4 massive Wright R3000 350 duplex Cyclone engines. He wipes sweat from his brow and mutters, "If this monster ever gets off the ground, she'll own the sky." But at the time, nobody's betting on it. Elsewhere, Washington, D.C., 1943. A meeting behind closed doors at the War Department. General Hap Arnold pounds a fist on the table. "We need range. We need altitude. We need payload. And I don't care if it takes every damn dollar in Roosevelt's pocket get those bombers flying. The war in Europe is devouring aircraft and pilots by the hour." And now, Japan, the so-called Empire of the Rising Sun, remains untouched by heavy strategic bombing. The Pacific is too vast. Existing bombers can't make the trip, let alone survive it. The answer? The most ambitious flying machine ever designed. The B-29 project becomes the most expensive weapons program of World War II, even more costly than the Manhattan Project. Over $3 billion invested, nearly 4,000 units planned. More than just an aircraft, the Superfortress is a gamble. A blunt message: when it flies, it will carry America's industrial fury to the enemy's doorstep. 200B 1943 first test flight, Wichita. Snow clings to the wings. Inside the cockpit, test pilot Edmund Allen grips the controls. 2 prototype models have already crashed. Engineers whisper about engine fires, runaway propellers, and poor cooling at altitude. But Allen nods at his co-pilot. "Let's give her the sky." The wheels lift. The hangars shrink below. The B-29 climbs, roaring into history. By January, more than 60 aircraft are in various stages of assembly. The U.S. Army Air Forces accelerate deployment. Aircrews are trained on the fly, sometimes learning to operate pressurization and radar systems while still in the air. Mechanics race to keep up with design changes arriving by the week. And somewhere in Guam, a new kind of airfield is being carved from volcanic rock, one long enough to support the takeoffs of these lumbering giants, loaded with over 10 tons of bombs. April 1944, Chengdu, Hina. It's not Guam that sees the first B-29 strikes. It's the ancient, humid airstrips of inland China. The plan, codenamed Operation Matterhorn, is bold and flawed. Fly B-29 seconds from India over the Himalayas, stage them in China, then strike southern Japan and industrial targets in Manchuria. The problem? Every gallon of fuel, every bomb, every bolt has to be flown in over the hump, the deadliest air route in the world. Engines freeze mid-air. Aircraft vanish into monsoons. Of 500 planes, more than 80 are lost, just in transit. Still, on June 15th, 1944, the first combat mission flies from China to Yawata, Japan. The results are underwhelming. Clouds obscure targets. Bombs miss. Crews return exhausted. A few don't return at all. Tokyo shrugs. The Japanese High Command views it as a publicity stunt, a curiosity, and besides, it won't happen again. But back in the U.S., General Curtis LeMay disagrees. Fall 1944, the Marianas. The turning point comes with the capture of Saipan, Tinian, and Guam. These islands are close enough to Japan and big enough to support massive airfields. Within months, the flat coral is paved over with runways stretching 8,500 feet, designed specifically for B-29 seconds. It's here that the real campaign begins. LeMay arrives in January 1945. He's 38, sharp-jawed, chain-smoking, and ruthless. The kind of man who sees war as arithmetic, targets, tonnage, tolerance. And he's fed up. High-altitude precision bombing hasn't worked. Winds are too strong. Targets are missed. Too many crews are dying for too little return. He proposes something radical. Strip the bombers of most guns. Load more incendiaries. Fly low, fly fast, and burn the cities. Brass balks. But LeMay insists. It's not about killing civilians, he says. It's about ending the war. March 1945 Tokyo is chosen. LeMay knows it's the heart of Japan's industrial web. But it's not just factories, it's workshops, homes, storehouses. Japan's war effort runs on cottage industry, on civilian labor spread through dense urban wards. Destroy the homes, destroy the tools, destroy the will. And Tokyo, built almost entirely from wood and paper, is the most flammable city on Earth. Plans are drawn. Napalm clusters are readied. Bombers are stripped. Crews are briefed. No parachutes, no mercy. The 9th of March, 1945, 8:50 p.m. Tinian Air Base. Engines roar to life in staggered succession. The flight line stretches for miles. Pilots check flaps. Navigators calculate wind drift. Tail gunners light cigarettes they won't smoke again. 334 B-29 seconds rise into the dark, heading north. Each one a lumbering messenger of fire. The Japanese High Command does not believe they will come. Even as Tokyo's sirens begin to sound, even as spotters radio in strange, low-flying objects approaching from the southeast, commanders hesitate. Flak crews scramble without clear orders. Night fighters can't scramble in time. It's too late. The skies are filled with ghosts, and the fire is just beginning. March 10th, 1945, 12:08 a.m., Eastern Tokyo. The first cluster of M69 incendiaries bursts open 2,000 feet above the district of Sumida. Each canister ejects 38 bomblets, small, finned cylinders packed with napalm gel and magnesium. They whistle as they fall. Then, silence and ignition. Hundreds of miniature fires blossom across rooftops. Within seconds, they leap from shingle to beam, from beam to curtain, from curtain to child's bed. Entire blocks erupt in flame. The wind, stoked by heat, begins to howl like a living thing. By 12:30, the second wave is overhead. Captain Raymond Smoot's Dynamite joins the stream of bombers darkening the moonlight above Tokyo's tightly packed wards. There is no formation now, just a mile-wide conveyor belt of destruction. Below, Tokyo is already burning. On the ground, chaos. Fire whistles. Sirens scream. But there is no coherent response. The city's fire breaks, designed for conventional fires, are useless. The napalm sticks to walls, to clothes, to skin. Water evaporates before it can be poured. Mothers hurl buckets into flames that only grow. In the narrow alleys of Honjo and Asakusa, desperate civilians flee toward the Sumida River, dragging children and blankets, faces streaked with soot and panic. Some wade into the freezing waters. Others huddle behind stone bridges. But the fire moves faster than feet. An elderly priest, Shiro Miyamoto, clutches his rosary and watches as his temple ignites like a torch. He mutters prayers, not for salvation, but for understanding. Somewhere behind him, a fuel depot explodes, turning night into dawn. Back in the air, 12:45 a.m. Inside Dynamite, Sergeant Elkins steadies himself over the bomb bay. Sweat drips from his helmet. Even at altitude, the heat below is climbing. The entire eastern half of the city appears to be glowing. He drops the second payload. A neat series of metallic clinks, then silence. Then fire. To his left, a nearby bomber banks too low. A sudden updraft caused by the firestorm below hurls the aircraft upward. Its wing clips the fuselage of another. Both tumble into the inferno, vanishing without a trace. Elkins stares blankly. "Jesus," he murmurs. "The sky is eating them." Captain Smoot clenches the yoke. "There's no time for sentiment. Just keep flying. In 10 minutes they'll be over open sea again." The firestorm forms. By 1:10 a.m., the air over Tokyo is alive. The heat rising from the city draws in cold air from surrounding districts, creating a violent vortex. Flames spiral upward, hungrily devouring oxygen. Wind speeds hit 100 miles per hour. People are pulled into the blaze by invisible hands, suffocated or incinerated in seconds. Asphalt boils. Steel girders melt. Even underground bomb shelters offer no protection. The superheated air rushes in and turns them into ovens. Japanese civil defense teams, armed with hand pumps and bamboo ladders, try to hold back the sea of flame. Their uniforms catch fire. Some collapse where they stand. Others throw themselves into the river. Eyewitness accounts describe red snow flakes of ash, so thick they blanket the ground. Dogs howl. Glass shatters. Telephone poles snap like matchsticks. The wind carries screams farther than it carries warnings. At 1:45 a.m., the final wave passes over. The last of the 334 B-29 seconds drop their loads. Some crews glimpse survivors, tiny figures running through fire like ants across coals. There is no pleasure in it. No celebration. Lieutenant Robert Kimball, the bombardier, turns away from his window. "We didn't bomb a city," he whispers. "We erased it." By the time the bombers reach the Pacific again, their bomb bays are empty. Their fuel is low. Their crews are silent. They do not yet know what they have done. Daybreak 5:12 a.m. Tokyo. The firestorm begins to die, starved of fuel. The air is still. The sky is choked with smoke. A crimson glow flickers beneath the haze, like coals beneath a collapsed campfire. A few survivors stumble from canals and underpasses, burned, dazed, crying without sound. Shitamachi is gone. Entire neighborhoods, Nagatacho, Asakusa, Fukagawa, erased. Roads are no longer visible. Landmarks are ash. Over 16 square miles of the city, an area larger than Manhattan, have been annihilated. Civilians wander through the ruin, looking for family, only to find bones. Charred bodies are piled at intersections. Many cannot be identified. Most are never counted. Later that day, Imperial Army headquarters. General Anami receives a map. It shows nothing but a blackened smear across central Tokyo. He says nothing. Neither do the others. The emperor is briefed. The phrase used is massive incendiary destruction. But no words can describe what happened. American psychological warfare leaflets had warned of firebombings. Most civilians believed it a bluff. Even after the raid, many in the Japanese government still believe the U.S. will not burn cities night after night. They are wrong. LeMay's campaign is just beginning. At Guam morning debrief, General Curtis LeMay listens to the reports with his usual stoic intensity. Over 100,000 dead, a staffer says. Civilian mostly. Estimated, LeMay asks. Conservative. He lights a cigarette and says nothing for a long moment. Behind him, a young lieutenant leans over a map. "Sir, where do we hit next?" LeMay exhales smoke. "Everywhere. March 11th, 1945, the Sumida River, Tokyo. The water is black. Not just from soot, but from the bodies. Hundreds of civilians, mothers, clutching children, entire families tied together with ropes so they wouldn't get separated, lie motionless in the river's shallows. Some jump to escape the flames. Others suffocated in the smoke. The air still tastes like burned paper and flesh. From the crumbled banks, rescue workers wade silently into the water, pulling charred corpses by the limbs, lining them on the shore. They do not speak. They do not cry. There are too many. In one corner of Hanzhou, the embers still flicker from smoldering furniture and collapsed shrines. A Buddhist bell, blackened but intact, rings faintly as wind passes through it, the only sound in a neighborhood that once housed 90,000 people. And somewhere in the ruins, a 5-year-old girl named Akiko wanders barefoot. Her white kimono is now gray. Her voice is hoarse from smoke. She doesn't know where her mother is, or her father, or anyone. She walks, eyes empty, through a landscape more apocalyptic than anything she could have imagined. And she is not alone. At Imperial Army Headquarters, 9A, M. Reports trickle in from Tokyo police, civil defense, and railway operators. One file is passed to General Yoshijiro Umezu. Casualties. 83, 793 initial. Injured, over Stonich. Homeless. Estimated 1 million. The numbers are staggering and still incomplete. General Anami reads through them slowly, jaw clenched. He speaks to no one. Behind him, younger officers look pale. They whisper about how this could have happened. The truth is unbearable. They had dismissed the B-29 seconds, called them clumsy and impractical, too expensive, too complex, vulnerable to fighters. But Japan's own air defenses had failed. The night fighters hadn't even taken off. The flak was ineffective at such low altitude, and no one had believed LeMay would attack the heart of their capital in one night. They were wrong, and Tokyo, the beating heart of the empire, now smolders like a sacrificial offering. March 12th, 1945, LeMay's office, Guam. Curtis LeMay stares at reconnaissance photos. The clarity is sickening. Whole blocks simply gone. Shitamachi is now a sea of rubble, with occasional shadows of building foundations like ghosts burned into the earth. Staff officers talk in background. Casualty estimates, fire patterns, air current models, fuel consumption. LeMay listens in silence, then interrupts. Damage assessment? A major steps forward. Approximately 16 square miles, 40% of Tokyo's manufacturing capacity destroyed. LeMay nods. Prepare the next target. Someone swallows. Civilian casualties are high, sir. LeMay removes his glasses. His eyes are bloodshot from lack of sleep. So was Pearl Harbor, he replies coldly. So was Manila. So is war. He is not without conscience, but he believes absolutely that this campaign will shorten the war. That the faster Japan is broken, the fewer Americans die in the end. And the Japanese military, he believes, will not surrender unless they are forced to their knees or set ablaze. March 13th. In the ruins of Tokyo, Akiko finds her father. He is lying face down near a burned rickshaw, half buried in debris. His clothes are mostly gone. His hand is black and blistered. She recognizes the locket around his neck. She kneels beside him and doesn't speak for an hour. Eventually, a young Japanese soldier, a conscript, finds her. He takes off his jacket and wraps it around her shoulders. He tries not to look at the body. Together, they walk toward a makeshift shelter in Ueno Park, where thousands of survivors now huddle under canvas sheets and scavenged wood. No food, no clean water, no explanation. Only smoke, ashes, and silence. That night, Japan's inner circles react. Prime Minister Kuniaki Koiso receives a private briefing. He listens. He doesn't blink. Then he says, if America can do this to Tokyo, they can do it to Osaka, to Kobe, to Nagoya. An aide adds, they will. Emperor Hirohito is informed the following morning. The report is sanitized. Civilian deaths are downplayed. But even so, the magnitude is impossible to hide. The emperor, calm but grave, reportedly asks, was it a military necessity? No one answers. March 16th, the next raids begin. The B-29 seconds return, this time to Osaka, then Kobe, then Nagoya. Night after night, the firebombings continue. Each mission echoes Tokyo's horror. low-level attacks, clustered incendiaries, no warning. LeMay calls it burning out the war. The destruction becomes methodical. In 4 months, nearly 70 Japanese cities are bombed. Over 500,000 civilians killed. Millions left homeless. Industrial production plummets. And still Japan does not surrender. April 1000, 945 Japanese propaganda reels run thin. The Ministry of Information censors news of the firebombings. But rumors spread faster than silence. Letters from survivors describe bodies melted to the streets. Friends turn to shadows on the walls. One writer calls it hell without devils. The population grows anxious. Trust in the army falters. Confidence in victory fades, not because of soldiers lost, but because of homes burned, cities vanished, and the terrifying realization that the Americans will not stop. The ugly plane they once laughed at now returns each night, faceless and invincible. The B-29 is no longer a curiosity. It is an omen. April 15th, 1945, above Osaka, 8,000 feet. The wind rips across the belly of the B-29 Murder Incorporated, streaked with soot from its last mission. Below, Osaka glows with a dull red pulse like the coals of a dying world. Sergeant Harold McMillan leans into his gun sight. Though there's little need tonight. Few fighters. Less flak. The Japanese defenses are crumbling. Through the narrow window, he sees it again. A city breaking like dry timber. Entire blocks erupt under napalm clusters. Black smoke mushrooms skyward and rises to meet them, staining the moonlit clouds. He turns to his crewmate and says, not without guilt, "We're not just bombing buildings anymore. We're burning Japan off the map." His voice is swallowed by the hum of engines. The B-29 turns west, mission complete. Another strike on a city that once stood tall, now a canvas of cinders. Back in Japan, Osaka's outskirts. Civilian volunteers dig furiously in collapsed shelters with their bare hands, hoping to find survivors. For many, there are none. The soil itself has turned hot and black. Everything organic has turned to dust animals, clothes, photographs. Among them, a teenage boy named Takashi digs alone. He's looking for his older brother, last seen carrying buckets toward the fire line 2 nights before. Takashi's hands are bleeding. His shirt is gone. His lungs ache from smoke inhalation. He uncovers a burned hand. Too small. Not him. Takashi doesn't stop digging. Kent. In Tokyo Imperial General Headquarters. By mid-April, the High Command no longer underestimates the B-29. They fear it. They call it the Black-Winged Reaper. The Japanese air defense network is overstretched and outdated. The Mitsubishi Ki-61 Tony and Nakajima Ki-84 Frank fighters are fast but limited by fuel and altitude. The B-29 seconds fly too high, too fast, and now too low. Radar is sporadic. Night intercepts are near impossible. One general slams his fist on the table and roars. They've changed the rules of war. Where is our answer? But there is none. Even the famed kamikaze units just beginning to rise in defense of Okinawa are useless against waves of B-29 seconds launching from islands out of fighter reach. Japan had built its empire on decisive naval battles and infantry spirit. But this enemy, these silent machines that come from the clouds, drop fire, and vanish, cannot be fought with swords, slogans, or suicide. On Guam, Curtis LeMay walks the runway. Dust swirls behind him as ground crews prepare another 100 B-29 seconds for a strike on Nagoya. He lights his cigar and watches one bomber roll out. No flares, no guns, only fire. A junior officer approaches with a clipboard. "Sir, reports say we've wiped out nearly 60% of Osaka's industrial capacity." LeMay nods. "And the city?" "Gone." The officer hesitates. "There are rumors, sir. Some say we've gone too far, that it's—" LeMay cuts him off. "You want to invade the home islands with 1,000,000 boys under fire? You think they'll surrender because we ask nicely?" He points toward the horizon. "They'll quit when we make quitting easier than dying." LeMay's logic is ruthless, almost mathematical. But in war, it makes a cruel kind of sense. May 1945. The firebombing campaign reaches full intensity. Every week, 3 to 5 cities are targeted. Toyama, Hamamatsu, Kawasaki, Sasebo. Precision is no longer the goal, destruction is. Entire cities are marked for incineration not by strategic importance, but by flammability. Napalm becomes the true weapon of the war, an invention born in Harvard labs, now unleashed with pitiless scale. Mixed with white phosphorus, it sticks to surfaces, flesh, bone. It cannot be washed off. In many cities, there are no fire crews left, no water pressure, no command, just civilians with rags and hope. At the Vatican, Pope Pius XII issues a plea. He calls for an end to the inhumanity inflicted on the innocent. In neutral Sweden, editorials liken the firebombings to medieval massacres. Even in the US, journalists begin asking, what are we becoming? But public sentiment remains hardened. Americans remember Pearl Harbor, the Bataan Death March, kamikaze attacks, and now, the brutal fighting on Iwo Jima and Okinawa. There is no appetite for mercy, only an end. Back in Japan, spring turns to summer. Fires bloom across the nation nightly. Rail networks fail. Postal services collapse. Hospitals overflow with burn victims. Some cities run out of burial space and resort to mass cremations. Still, the government does not surrender. Propaganda urges civilians to fight with bamboo spears. Schoolgirls are trained to throw Molotov cocktails. Radio stations broadcast hopeful music under skies red with smoke. In private, even the most senior commanders begin to despair. Another 2 months like this, says one colonel, and there will be nothing left to defend but ruins and memories. June 1st, 1945, Tinian Island. The 509th Composite Group prepares a new payload. It's not napalm this time. It's not hundreds of bomblets. It's a single, untested device, so powerful it could make every firebomb raid seem small. Its name, Little Boy. The B-29 that will carry it is already being fitted. It's called Enola Gay. Juli 10th, Tulantula Huda Fem, Yokohama, Tula May Strena. The sky bleeds orange once more. Yokohama, Japan's second-largest port city, is vanishing under another carpet of fire. Over 500 B-29 seconds sweep across the dark like flocks of mechanical crows. Below, the old merchant houses, dockyards, and factories burn together, indistinguishable under the storm of incendiaries. By dawn, over 80% of the city is gone. Children cry in fields outside the city, clutching ash-streaked dolls and rice sacks packed in panic. Across the bay, even in Tokyo, the glow is visible. The ground shakes. Birds stop singing. A nun in a distant convent writes in her diary, "We woke to the sound of a city dying." In Tokyo, the prime minister is replaced. As Japan's cities fall one by one, Prime Minister Kuniaki Koiso is forced to resign. He is replaced by Admiral Kuntaro Suzuki, a veteran of the Russo-Japanese War, cautious and deeply aware of the hopelessness ahead. Suzuki confides to Emperor Hirohito, "This war cannot be won, only survived." But the military refuses to bend. General Korichika Anami and the Army High Command still dream of decisive battle, an honorable last stand that will force the Americans to negotiate peace. They believe the Allies fear Japanese resistance on the home islands. They don't yet understand what's coming. July 14th, 1945, LeMay speaks plainly. At a staff meeting in Guam, General Curtis LeMay stares at a map dotted with red circles. Each one marks a city already bombed or scheduled for burning. Of Japan's 66 major urban centers, more than 50 have already been attacked. A colonel updates the board. Industry destroyed, 43%. Civilian death toll, over 100 millions. Estimated homeless, 9 million. Another officer adds, "Still no signs of surrender." LeMay doesn't blink. Then we keep going. But even he knows they are reaching the limits of what fire can accomplish. The factories are rubble. The railways are twisted steel. The will of the people is fraying. But the government still holds the line, still dreams of a miracle. He needs something that will end the war in one blow. And across the Pacific, in New Mexico, that blow is being prepared. July 16th, 1945, the Trinity test. In the deserts of Alamogordo, New Mexico, the earth itself shakes. A fireball rises taller than any skyscraper. The air turns to plasma. Scientists and soldiers alike shield their eyes from the blinding light. The atomic bomb, the culmination of years of secret work under the Manhattan Project, has just been unleashed for the first time. J. Robert Oppenheimer, watching the explosion, quotes the Bhagavad Gita, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." President Truman receives the message aboard the USS Augusta in the Atlantic. The experiment has been successful. Suddenly, America has a new weapon, a final weapon. July 24th, the target list is reviewed. 5 cities are selected for possible atomic strikes: Hiroshima, Kokura, Niigata, Kyoto, and Nagasaki. The decision stirs debate not just among generals, but among politicians, scientists, even clergy. Some urge a demonstration detonate the bomb on a deserted island to frighten the Japanese into surrender. Others, LeMay among them, argue that only shock will break the enemy's resolve. Japan must witness its cities vanish instantly, without warning. No demonstration, no mercy. Secretary of War Henry Stimson crosses Kyoto off the list, citing its cultural importance. Hiroshima remains. July 26th, the Potsdam Declaration is issued. From Germany, the Allies send an ultimatum to Japan: surrender unconditionally or face prompt and utter destruction. The Japanese government reads it, then rejects it. They have no idea what utter destruction really means. Not yet. July 29th, a coded order is issued. On the island of Tinian, Colonel Paul Tibbets receives his orders. He is to command a specially modified B-29 stripped of guns, reinforced for weight, and equipped with a mysterious payload known only to a few. The aircraft is named Enola Gay, after Tibbets' mother. Crews begin preparations. The bomb is carefully assembled in secret. It's 10 feet long, 28 inches wide, and weighs over 9,000 pounds. Its name is Little Boy. Only a handful of men on the island know what it truly is. They're told, "This will end the war." August 1st, Japan burns again. Even as the atomic bomb waits in its cradle, the conventional firebombing campaign continues. B-29 seconds strike Mito, Hachioji, and Toyama. On August 2nd, Toyama, a city of over 100,000, is reduced to ashes by 173 superfortresses in a single night. The destruction is so total that U.S. analysts later rate the bombing as more efficient than even Tokyo. Yet still no surrender. A Japanese boy writes in his diary, "Our teacher said Japan is winning, but my house is gone. So is school. So is my uncle." The propaganda no longer matches reality. And now, reality is about to change again. August 5th, Tinian Island, midnight. Under heavy guard, Little Boy is loaded into the bomb bay of Enola Gay. Technicians check and recheck the firing mechanism. The flight path is confirmed. Weather reports over Hiroshima are clear. The city is still untouched, no major fire bombings, no prior raids. It is, in every sense, pristine. That's exactly what the scientists want, a clean canvas. In 8 hours, Hiroshima will no longer exist. The age of fire is ending. The atomic age is about to begin. August 6th, 1945, 2:45 a.m., Tinian Island. Under floodlights on the airstrip at North Field, the Enola Gay begins to taxi forward. Its polished aluminum skin reflects the faces of the ground crews watching silently from the shadows. Some salute. Others turn away. The aircraft groans under the weight of Little Boy, cradled in its belly like a secret too terrible to keep. At the controls, Colonel Paul Tibbets sits silent, eyes forward. His co-pilot, Captain Robert Lewis, checks the final instruments. Neither man speaks of what's on board. They've been told it will end the war, not how. The engines roar louder. The B-29 gathers speed. At 2:58 a.m., it leaves the runway and disappears into the Pacific night. Hiroshima, Japan, Setia. Emi. The city is waking. Children walk to school in the soft morning light. Women hang laundry from rooftops. Streetcars rumble along their tracks. Civilians gather in the parks to escape the late summer heat. Hiroshima has seen few raids, and few defenses remain. The city, nestled between rivers, crisscrossed with wooden homes and paper screens, still believes it might be spared. In the command post, the air raid officer dismisses a B-29 sighting as reconnaissance. The all-clear signal is given. A nurse at the Hiroshima Red Cross Hospital smiles as she hands a cup of water to a patient. "It'll be another hot one," she says. No one looks up. No one runs. 8 horas 15 minutos 17 segundos a.m. 31,000 feet above Hiroshima. The bomb bay doors open. Tibbets gives the order. The bomb falls. Little boy drops silently for 44 seconds, spinning gently, its casing painted dull gray. It carries 141 pounds of uranium-235, a product of science and desperation. At 1,900 feet above the city, a barometric switch triggers the detonator. A light brighter than 1,000 suns explodes in the sky. The shockwave is instant. A white-hot fireball vaporizes everything in a half-mile radius: buildings, streets, human beings. They do not burn. They vanish. Over 60,000 people are gone in seconds. The air becomes a weapon. The fireball expands at supersonic speed, setting the atmosphere itself ablaze. Skin peels from bone. Shadows are burned into walls. Entire neighborhoods combust. The heat exceeds 10,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Winds over 1,000 kilometers per hour flatten what fire cannot reach. A man standing 3,000 feet from ground zero watches his wife disintegrate before his eyes. Another survivor dives into a canal, only to find the water boiling. The Hiroshima castle, centuries old, collapses into its own moat. The ancient temples turn to powder. Stone lanterns melt. There is no warning. There is no understanding. 8:16 a.m. in the sky. Enola Gay banks hard to the right. Even at 10 miles away, the flash blinds the crew. Captain Lewis grips the edge of the window and mutters aloud, "My God, what have we done?" A column of fire rises into the sky, followed by a dense black mushroom cloud stretching 50,000 feet high. The city is gone, replaced by a shadow beneath the cloud. Radio communication falls silent. No one on the ground is calling back. Back on Tinian, LeMay receives confirmation. Target destroyed. Noon. Tokyo. The news reaches the Japanese War Ministry in fragments. A single plane, one bomb, an entire city annihilated. At first, it sounds like propaganda. Even the most hardened generals cannot believe it. General Anami demands clarification. Reports from local observers confirm the unthinkable. The American statement soon follows. A new weapon, unlike anything before, has been used on Hiroshima. The term atomic bomb spreads through the halls of government like smoke in a burning room. For the first time, the cabinet understands. There is no defense against this. Still, some say Japan must fight on. Others argue surrender is now inevitable. But no consensus is reached. The emperor waits. August 7th, the horror unfolds. Radiation sickness begins killing the survivors. Thousands who escaped the initial blast now bleed from the gums, vomit uncontrollably, and collapse without wounds. Doctors are helpless. Hospitals have been leveled. The Red Cross is overwhelmed. American planes drop leaflets announcing the bomb and threatening more. Survivors describe the sky opening. Some still believe they were struck by divine punishment. Others think it was a chemical attack. No one truly understands the science. All they know is that a single plane had the power to wipe out an entire city in an instant. Back on Tinian, a second bomb is prepared. 3 days later, on August 9th, another B-29 boxcar lifts off, carrying Fat Man, a plutonium-based bomb even more powerful than Little Boy. The primary target is Kokura. But cloud cover prevents visual targeting. The plane diverts to its secondary Nagasaki. At 11:02 a.m., the bomb detonates over the city's industrial valley. The blast kills 40,000 instantly. Tens of thousands more will die in the weeks to come. By week's end, over 200,000 civilians have died from the two atomic attacks, either vaporized, burned, or slowly poisoned. The world has changed forever. August 10th, Tokyo is silent. In a rare and private meeting, Emperor Hirohito breaks tradition. He speaks. We must endure the unendurable. For the first time in history, Japan considers unconditional surrender. The fire had not been enough. But the flash, the terrible flash from above, had broken the steel that fire could not. The war is not yet over, but the end has begun. August 12th, 1945 Imperial Palace, Tokyo. The sound in the chamber is unlike anything ever heard inside these ancient walls' silence. The air is thick, not with smoke, but with decision. Seated in his white military uniform, Emperor Hirohito listens as his Supreme War Council argues furiously around him. General Anami insists Japan must continue. Let the Americans invade. We'll make them bleed on every hill, in every village. We'll never surrender. Foreign Minister Togo bows slightly, voice calm. Your Majesty, we now face weapons that make firebombing look merciful. The room stills. Everyone knows what he means. 2 cities gone in 3 days. Vaporized. Not burned, obliterated. There was no counterattack. No chance to fight back. Just a sudden erasure. And now, U.S. leaflets claim more bombs are ready. Emperor Hirohito closes his eyes. He is not just ruler of a shattered empire, he is the voice of 8 million homeless, hundreds of thousands of charred corpses, and cities turned into graveyards. I have made my decision, he says softly. The war must end. August 13th, Guam. At the U.S. Air Base on Guam, Curtis LeMay reviews plans for Operation Downfall, the massive invasion of Japan's home islands set to begin in November. His estimates are grim. Over 500,000 U.S. casualties, possibly more than 1 million Japanese dead civilian and military alike. But the operation is on hold. Washington is waiting. Japan hasn't officially surrendered yet, and no one trusts that it will. LeMay orders firebombing to resume. That night, over 700 B-29 seconds roar over Japan in the largest single raid of the war. Their targets: 4 cities untouched until now, including Kumagaya and Izazaki. Burns. Even after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, even after 65 cities, the flames continue. August 14th, a coup brews in Tokyo. Not everyone agrees with the emperor's decision. In a dark hallway of the Imperial Palace, a group of fanatical military officers hatch a desperate plan, the Kyujo incident. They will seize the palace, destroy the emperor's recorded surrender speech, arrest or assassinate the civilian government, force Japan to fight on. As Tokyo slumbers, the rebel officers strike. Soldiers surround the palace. Communications are cut. Loyal guards are attacked. One general is shot dead for refusing to help, but the coup unravels in chaos. They cannot find the recording. Loyal officers resist. Time runs out. By dawn, the rebels surrender. The speech survives. Barely. August 15th, 1945 Tokyo. It is just after noon. Radios across the nation crackle to life. Crowds huddle in silence. Some kneel, others clasp hands. The voice that follows is quiet, measured and unmistakable. It is the voice of the emperor. For most citizens, it is the first time they've ever heard him speak. To strive for the happiness and prosperity of all nations, as well as the security and well-being of our subjects, we have decided to effect a settlement of the present situation. He never says the word surrender, but everyone understands. The war is over. In the ruins of Tokyo, people weep. Some cry with relief, others with shame. Children whose mothers burned in the fire bombings now watch elderly neighbors sob openly in the street. Survivors of Hiroshima kneel before their radios and listen with hollow eyes. For Akiko, the little girl who wandered barefoot through the ashes of Sumida Ward, the emperor's words mean one thing: no more fire. She will live. She doesn't yet know what peace is, but she knows what the war was. August 16th, the B-29 seconds stop flying. The bomb bays are finally empty. On Guam, the flight crews of the 20th Air Force are grounded. The airmen, many just boys who signed up at 18, sit quietly in tents, playing cards or writing letters home. Sergeant James Elkins, once aboard Dynamite, stands by a hangar and stares at the Pacific horizon. His journal reads, "We won, but all I can remember is Tokyo burning." Curtis LeMay, promoted again, visits a chapel on base. No press, no orders. Just a moment of stillness. He does not pray. He smokes. August 20th, Japan's surrender terms are formalized. A delegation is sent to the Philippines to meet General MacArthur. The terms are simple: unconditional surrender, complete demilitarization, American occupation. The Japanese agree. But the scars, physical, spiritual, are not so easily erased. The cities are still ash. The rivers still carry the bones. The air still smells of smoke. September 2nd, 1945 USS Missouri, Tokyo Bay. Japan's formal surrender is signed aboard an American battleship surrounded by Allied warships. General Douglas MacArthur speaks solemnly. "Let us pray that peace be now restored to the world, and that God will preserve it always." On the Japanese side, Foreign Minister Mamoru Shigemitsu signs with a cane in one hand and a trembling pen in the other. Above them, dozens of B-29 seconds roar across the sky a final salute, not to intimidate, but to remind. The war that began with planes at Pearl Harbor has ended with fire and ash raining from the sky. And the B-29 once laughed at has changed the world. From its bomb bays came firestorms that erased cities. From its wings, it carried the very first nuclear weapon used in war. Once mocked for its size, its cost, its complexity, the B-29 became the final word in a war that swallowed continents. The officers who laughed at it now stand in ruins. The ugly machine they dismissed as impossible became the ghost they never saw coming. September 3 1900 of Femofura, Tokyo Bay, just after dawn. The fog drapes over the still waters like a shroud. The guns aboard the USS Missouri are silent. The banners are furled. The smell of salt, rust, and diesel lingers in the air. On deck, the surrender documents have been signed. Officers shake hands stiffly. Some look away. No one smiles. Overhead, as if summoned by memory, a formation of B-29 seconds rumbles past the cloud line. Their polished bellies glint in the rising sun, shadows passing over the water like angels of death now at rest. The Japanese officers stare up at them. Once, they scoffed at those aircraft too big, too slow, too American. Now, they recognize them for what they were, not just machines of war, but the harbingers of Japan's collapse. In a Tokyo radio station, a voice recites a casualty report. Civilians lost in Tokyo, over 100,000. In Nagoya, Osaka, Kobe, tens of thousands more. Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Cities no longer exist. The numbers are read without emotion. There are too many to feel each one. At home, families sit in the dark, surrounded by silence. The fires are out, but their shadows remain on every wall, every windowless frame, every foundation where a house once stood. In Hiroshima, one survivor writes in a diary, her fingers still bandaged, "I no longer fear dying. I fear forgetting." October 1945 occupation begins. American troops land in droves. Their jeeps roll through the burned husks of Yokohama, Tokyo, Nagasaki. Civilians line the streets not with hatred, but with weary stares and bowed heads. The GIs pass silently, shocked by what they see. Sergeant Daniel Brewster, part of the 1st Cavalry Division, writes home. This isn't victory, it's aftermath. Children with bandaged eyes, women scavenging from ruins, priests holding funerals for entire neighborhoods. There is no celebration, only the work of rebuilding something too broken to name. And over it all, the symbol of that destruction still flies over the wreckage, the silhouette of a B-29 on tail patches, nose art, and briefing posters. The plane that ended the war has become a ghost. General Curtis LeMay returns to Japan. But this time, he walks. In October, LeMay tours the charred remains of Tokyo by jeep. The city he ordered destroyed now lies beneath his boots. Entire blocks have been replaced by ash. The Imperial Palace still stands, though barely. LeMay steps out into what used to be Shitamachi, the old artisan district. His boots crunch through cinders. He sees the skeleton of a tram car, the melted ribs of a steel bridge, and the remains of a tea shop wall, a woman's shadow burned into the stone. He does not speak for an hour. When he returns to base, he orders additional food drops and medical aid for civilians. Even LeMay, the man who turned fire into strategy, cannot look at what he's done without blinking. In the United States, the B-29 becomes a legend. Posters of the Superfortress appear in newspapers, film reels, and military recruiting stations. Documentaries hail it as the plane that won the war. In Kansas, Boeing hosts a celebration. Workers line up to shake hands with Tibbets and LeMay. Children pose beside mock-ups of Enola Gay. But not everyone claps. A senator from Illinois warns in Congress, "What we've built is not just a plane, it's a promise of annihilation." The public cheers anyway. The war is over. American soldiers are coming home. And the plane that brought them home faster is now enshrined in glory. But in secret, the Pentagon begins designing something new. Faster, bigger, able to carry even more devastating bombs. Because the world is not at peace, only paused. Japan began counting its dead. By November 1945, the Tokyo Fire Department completes its first full survey of the March 10 raid. It's worse than feared. Over 105,000 confirmed dead, with estimates suggesting over 130,000. More than 1 million homeless. 267,000 buildings destroyed. 16 square miles flattened a third of the entire city. It remains the deadliest single air raid in history. More people died in Tokyo that night than in either Hiroshima or Nagasaki. And yet, history often forgets. The fire did not glow like nuclear flash. It burned in silence, in smoke, in skin. Winter arrives. Tokyo shivers. Without homes, thousands sleep in makeshift shelters, or beneath the blackened frames of what once were houses. Akiko, now 6, sits beside a steel drum with 3 other children. She still wears the same jacket a young soldier gave her in March. She's older now, not in years, but in eyes. She does not speak much. Her words were lost in the smoke. But every time she hears a plane overhead, even a peaceful one, she stops and stares until it vanishes. Not in fear, in memory. December 1945, the B-29's last wartime mission. A single Superfortress takes off from Saipan, not with bombs, but with supplies. Rice, medicine, blankets. It flies over a ruined city and drops parachutes by the dozens. No one shoots. No one runs. Below, children wave. The B-29, once a symbol of fire and ash, becomes a lifeline. Curtis LeMay authorizes dozens more humanitarian flights. "I burned them," he says to an aide. "It's only fair I help feed them." For many in Japan, the plane that brought death now brings rice and survival. The B-29's shadow never left Japan. Its scream haunted the wind. Its bombs reshaped cities. Its silhouette filled nightmares. But in time, it also carried medicine. And in the ruins it left behind, peace was planted. Not easily, not cleanly, but perhaps for the first time in years, the land of the rising sun could rise again. May 1946, Hiroshima Peace Park, Ground Zero. The cherry blossoms bloom again, pink petals falling softly onto scorched earth. At the epicenter of the atomic blast, a crowd gathers in silence. Children in school uniforms bow their heads. Survivors, known now as hibakusha, place flowers at the foot of a blackened foundation stone that once held a school. The sky above is calm. No sirens, no bombers, just birds. A Buddhist monk rings a ceremonial bell. Each chime echoes across the remains of Hiroshima, not as a warning, but as a prayer. 1 year ago, this ground boiled. Now, it weeps in remembrance. In Tokyo, life claws its way forward. Wooden houses begin to rise again, built by hand from scavenged timber. Markets return. Children play barefoot in alleyways that once smoldered with napalm. Newspapers print headlines of American trials, occupation orders, and the new Constitution being drafted. There are no more air raids, no more leaflets, only the memory of fire. General MacArthur governs from the Daiichi building near the Imperial Palace. He watches the Japanese rebuild not with rage, but with quiet determination. Factories return not to build planes or bullets, but to forge pans, bicycles, pencils. The same industrial strength that once fueled war is now turned to survival. And hovering over it all, even in absence, is the legacy of one machine. The B-29 Superfortress is decommissioned. Its job is done. By 1947, most are placed in long rows on the tarmac at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Arizona. The desert becomes a graveyard of wings and fuselages. Some are stripped for parts. Others are left to rust. Only a few will fly again, repurposed for weather surveillance, mapping, or transport. Enola Gay is disassembled, stored in crates, and hidden away from public view. For years, it becomes a symbol too difficult to display, too painful, too controversial. One airman says, "That plane ended the war and started the next one." Because now, the B-29 isn't just a bomber. It's the first aircraft of the nuclear age. In the United States, reflection begins. The war is over. The troops are home. The parades fade into photographs. And America begins to ask, what did we do? Newspapers publish editorials. Was Tokyo necessary? Did the firebombs win the war or end morality? Survivors testify. Pilots speak cautiously. Some regret, others justify. Curtis LeMay remains unapologetic. We shortened the war. We saved more lives than we took, but others aren't so sure. Even President Truman, years later, will privately question whether the bombings, fire, and nuclear alike had crossed a moral line that can never be uncrossed. The legacy of the B-29 is not clean. It's ashes and armistice, precision and annihilation. In Japan, a generation grows up in the shadow of silence. Children learn of the raids from parents who rarely speak of them. Museums are built in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Charred lunchboxes, burned sandals, fragments of stone with shadows seared into them, all displayed to honor memory, not vengeance. One Japanese poot writes, "The planes came like whispers. The night opened like a wound, and the morning never returned the same." Akiko, the girl who survived Sumida Ward, grows up to become a teacher. She never leaves Tokyo. Every March 10th, she lights a candle near the river where her father died. She never speaks much of that night, but she teaches her students to value every sunrise because she remembers one they never got to see. 1,960 seconds. The Cold War deepens. B-29 seconds give way to B-52 seconds. Missiles replace bombs. But the blueprint remains. A distant enemy, a terrible payload, and the cold logic of destruction. Historians look back on the B-29 as a paradox, an engineering marvel, born of necessity, wielded with terrifying efficiency. It was the peak of American wartime innovation. Pressurized cabins, remote-controlled guns, long-range precision. It was faster than any bomber before it, and more powerful than anything the Axis had imagined. But it also brought a new kind of warfare. Not trench, not blitzkrieg, but erasure. One final flight. In 1976, the Enola Gay is partially restored and displayed at the Smithsonian's National Air and Space Museum, sparking protests, debates, and deep soul-searching. Some call it glorification. Others call it history. In front of the exhibit, a father stands with his son. The child asks, "Is this the plane that saved America?" The father hesitates. "It's the plane that ended the war," he says. Some people say it saved lives. Some say it destroyed too many. Both are right. That's why we remember. They walk on. And what of the laughter? The Japanese officers who once mocked the B-29, who called it ugly, impractical, impossible, never imagined it would reach their skies. But it did. Again and again, it came with flame, with thunder, and finally with silence. The laughter stopped in Tokyo's ashes. It stopped in Hiroshima's flash. It stopped when the war that began with ambition ended with incineration. The B-29 did not just win the war. It rewrote it. And though its engines are now quiet, its shadow still flies not over cities, but through history, through memory, through the enduring tension between invention and consequence. It was the plane they laughed at, until they saw their cities burn.